The night the Soviet Union collapsed, the world did not celebrate. It inhaled sharply and held its breath. Empires rarely die quietly, and this one bled weapons, secrets, and men to the dark. In that silence, something far more dangerous than war began to move. Maps changed overnight, but loyalties did not. Generals woke up without countries, arsenals without paymasters, and soldiers without futures. Chaos does not announce itself, it seeps. The West called it the end of history, but history never ends, it mutates. Beneath the speeches and treaties, old networks adapted with ruthless efficiency. Power simply changed hands without changing behavior. Former Soviet republics became pressure cookers of ambition and resentment. Borders hardened while economies collapsed, creating black markets richer than governments. Violence became a currency. Weapons disappeared by the thousands, then the millions. Nuclear material, chemical stockpiles, and advanced conventional arms slipped through cracked oversight. Intelligence agencies realized too late that containment was no longer physical. America watched carefully and said very little. Victory demanded discretion, not celebration. The war after the Cold War would be fought without declarations. U.S. Army Special Operations were uniquely suited for this silence. They had been shaped by proxy wars, deniable missions, and moral gray zones. Their value was not in overwhelming force, but in controlled presence. These soldiers came from units forged in jungles, deserts, and failed states. They were trained to operate without flags, applause, or certainty. Their greatest strength was adaptability. Origins mattered because doctrine followed experience. Vietnam taught patience, Latin America taught influence, and Europe taught restraint. The post-Soviet world demanded all three at once. Selection was never about heroism. It was about endurance under uncertainty and obedience under ambiguity. Men failed not because they were weak, but because they could not think alone. Candidates were stripped of identity and comfort until instinct replaced ego. Hunger, exhaustion, and isolation were not obstacles but tools. What remained was judgment. Training expanded beyond weapons and tactics. Language immersion, cultural anthropology, and behavioral analysis became operational necessities. Understanding people mattered more than controlling terrain. The enemy was no longer a uniformed army. It was a network, fluid and adaptive. To fight it required becoming equally invisible. Deployment orders were deliberately vague. Teams were briefed on objectives that shifted as soon as boots touched foreign soil. Flexibility became survival. They arrived in countries still arguing about their own identities. Ministries were corrupt, borders porous, and allegiances temporary. Stability was an illusion everyone pretended to share. American soldiers lived among the people they were meant to influence. They learned which streets to avoid and which leaders could not be trusted. Trust was transactional and fragile. Combat rarely looked like combat. It came as sudden ambushes, disappearances, and betrayals. Violence was brief and unforgiving. There were no front lines, only fault lines. Every meeting carried risk. Every alliance had an expiration date. Survival depended on reading people faster than they could lie. Rules of engagement were written for wars that no longer existed. Command expected precision without escalation. Mistakes carried strategic consequences. Pressure flowed silently from Washington through layers of deniability. Success was required, recognition forbidden. Failure was unacceptable and unacknowledged. Brotherhood formed not through ceremony, but necessity. Teams became families because isolation demanded it. Trust was absolute or fatal. Loss came suddenly and without explanation. Men vanished into classified reports and unmarked memories. Grief had no outlet. Families received folded flags without context. Questions went unanswered by design. Silence became policy. Controversy followed these missions like a shadow. Allegations surfaced briefly, then disappeared. Accountability dissolved into bureaucracy. Some operations prevented catastrophe. Others merely delayed it. Measuring success became subjective. The underworld adapted quickly. Criminal networks learned counterintelligence. Militias learned Western tactics. Every move was studied. Special operators carried decisions that never reached public debate. Ethics blurred under pressure and urgency. Every compromise left a scar. Veterans returned home unable to explain where they had been. Medals were sparse, stories forbidden. Reintegration was uneven. Critics questioned the morality of invisible wars. Supporters argued visibility would destroy effectiveness. The debate remained unresolved. Legacy was difficult to define. Stabilization in one region often meant destabilization elsewhere. History recorded little. The post-Soviet underworld continued to evolve. Networks hardened, ideologies merged, and threats globalized. Early interventions echoed forward. Special operations doctrine evolved with it. Influence replaced occupation. Precision replaced dominance. Lessons were paid for in blood. Commanders aged under burdens few understood. Decisions carried diplomatic and human cost. Responsibility was personal. The men who served did not speak of heroism. They spoke of moments and faces. Pride was quiet. Service became internalized. Meaning was self-defined. Silence endured. History may never fully uncover these operations. Documents will remain sealed. Truth stays fragmented. The war did not end. It simply changed how it spoke. The early successes bred confidence, and confidence bred expansion. What began as containment quietly evolved into influence and disruption. Missions multiplied faster than doctrine could adapt. Special operations teams found themselves embedded deeper than ever intended. Temporary deployments became long-term presences masked as training exchanges. Lines between advisor and operator blurred. Local forces learned quickly, but loyalty remained conditional. Allegiances shifted with money, survival, and fear. Trust had to be renewed constantly. American soldiers learned to read rooms like terrain. A pause in conversation could signal betrayal more clearly than intercepted chatter. Survival depended on intuition sharpened by exhaustion. Combat intensified without warning. Small engagements escalated into sudden firefights in places officially at peace. There were no reinforcements, only extraction windows. Every shot fired carried diplomatic weight. A single mistake could destabilize a fragile region. Precision was no longer tactical, it was political. Command pressure increased as visibility remained non-existent. Washington demanded outcomes without exposure. Field commanders absorbed the risk personally. Operational tempo accelerated relentlessly. Teams redeployed with minimal recovery, carrying unresolved trauma forward. Fatigue became normalized. Brotherhood deepened under this strain. Men trusted each other with decisions that could end careers or lives. Bonds hardened through shared consequence. Loss became cumulative rather than singular. Each death echoed previous ones, compounding grief. There was no time to process. Memorials were internal rituals, brief and private. Names were spoken quietly, then locked away. Mission continued regardless. Controversy intensified as operations expanded. Accusations of overreach surfaced in intelligence circles. Public acknowledgement never followed. Ethical boundaries blurred further with each compromise. Partnerships with questionable actors became routine. Necessity replaced idealism. Some successes prevented mass casualties and regional collapse. Others empowered future adversaries unknowingly. Consequences unfolded years later. The underworld adapted with alarming speed. Criminal syndicates merged with extremist groups. Profit and ideology became interchangeable. Special operators began facing enemies trained indirectly by their own doctrine. Tactics mirrored tactics. The reflection was unsettling. Veterans rotated home carrying invisible weight. Sleep became fragmented, silence habitual. Explanation remained impossible. Families sensed distance but received no answers. The war followed soldiers home quietly. Reintegration strained relationships. Criticism grew within military circles themselves. Questions emerged about sustainability and cost. Answers remained classified. Doctrine shifted incrementally, reacting rather than leading. Lessons were learned too late for some. Adaptation carried casualties. Commanders faced moral isolation. Decisions were theirs alone, consequences shared by few. Leadership aged men rapidly. Despite everything, commitment did not waver. Service became identity. Withdrawal was unthinkable. History continued without acknowledging these wars. Textbooks remained silent. Effects rippled globally. The post-Soviet underworld became a permanent battlefield. Geography mattered less than influence. Conflict decentralized. Special operations remained at the center of this quiet storm. Their presence shaped outcomes invisibly. Absence was never an option. As years passed, the whisper grew louder. Shadows multiplied rather than receded. The war learned to endure.